All right, we left off here, guys, looking at the scope of the British Empire and talking about those guys being a financial empire as well as a holding empire across the world. Now, as we move on, you have to understand that there's going to be competition, and people are going to want to take a shot at the United Kingdom and really exploit as much as they can in order to benefit their own country. So countries like France, Germany, all those that are competing with them in Europe begin to acquire colonies. Okay, so late 1800s, you have a really an economic boom in the United States and Germany. You have a lot of immigrants coming to the United States. Their economy's going through the roof. The U.S. starts to expand in Southeast Asia, Latin America, all over the place, um, especially with the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, now the Monroe Doctrine was a document issued in the early 1800s by President James Monroe, and what it basically says is that the United States will be the protectorate of Latin America. And if anybody comes in and messes with a country or people in Latin America, they're messing with the United States. So that kept a lot of the European powers out and just asserted our influence and control over the Latin America. Okay, now Britain, in when faced with this challenge of increased competition around the globe, really by Germany, United States, and some other countries, they expand and they assert their hold really wherever their colonies were and try to increase those markets and to make them more profitable for Britain so they can become more powerful. Okay. Um, Imperialism now fosters intense rivalries, and you'll have to keep that in mind as we start to look at World War One. Okay, so you have countries now not just competing in Europe, but they're competing across the globe for the same resources, and countries, especially European countries and the United States, started to see colonies or foreign possessions as critical and essential for their economic development. Okay, the French and the Dutch expand their holdings. France, really by 1900, is the second largest colonial power to Britain, and they very much wanted to succeed Britain in that title. And that's not too long ago. I mean, 1900 is not, it's not like it's 4,000 years ago, guys. Um, Spain and Portugal now, who were major players in North America, and then their empires shrink after that, become to get involved in Africa like everybody else. Austria-Hungary moves into the Balkans, or the area just to the north and west of Greece. Russia now also expands. They take over the Caucasus Mountain region. They expand into Central Asia, like Mongolia, places like that, and they take Siberia. So you have countries all over the world now exerting their influence and power in the name of colonization with the intent of improving their own economic uh, bottom line. People who didn't have colonies now, Italy, Germany, who was really a fairly quiet colonial power, but in the late 1800s, early 1900s comes into the game a little more, going to Africa. Belgium as well. I mean, the Belgian Congo, and I'll show you a map here in a second where all the countries were. Um, but they expand and they get in there because they see the benefits that they get from Britain. Now, again, you have to ask yourself, would these countries be colonizing if there was no benefit to them? And again, I think the answer is obviously no, they would not. So this map, which you guys have seen before, just details the partition of Africa, meaning how was Africa divided up. Um, Starting in 1885 and ending in 1914 with the onset of World War One, you could see that one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different European countries all had carved up the entire continent of Africa, looking at their resources. Oil wasn't big, but it becomes big near the end. Gold is a huge resource. Um, Exotic animals, all that become really conquest of empire and prizes of colonialism. So here you have an entire continent that is just divided up, and now you have to worry not just about conflict in Europe, but you have to worry about conflict in defending your colonies around the world. So France and Britain not only have to protect their own borders in Northern Europe, but now they have to protect the borders here and here and here. I mean, all over the place. And you look at Britain, the British controlling ports and port areas around um, Africa, and that's incredibly important. So if you want to get to French West Africa, more than likely you have to go through a British port. So this is a big deal that all the countries came in there and really divided it up. Okay, as we look again now, you have two non-European powers, right? The Japanese and the United States start to get into the expansion game as well. Now, the United States never officially had a colony, but they did have possessions around the world, namely in Latin America and Southeast Asia with Cuba and the Philippines. Cuba was turned over, obviously. Um, but they both have their eyes on really helping them out, helping their own self out economically and moving forward. A map now of Southeast Asia. If you look up here, you have the Russian Empire, and you see all these lines. These are railroads, okay? And it's incredibly important because if you're going to get supplies, or if you're going to really expand economically, you need to transport your goods. So now we can really juxtapose this with the map of Africa, but you have Great Britain, the Netherlands, the Dutch, France, United States, Russia, and Japan, all with colonial holdings in here. Now, China's a different story. Okay, we'll talk about those guys in a little bit, but they have um, really the fall of a dynasty, and then they're up in the air for a while simply because European powers take spheres of influence in China and try to really divide it all up. Um, but the jewel of the British Empire ends up being India. France has a huge role in Southeast Asia, namely what becomes known as Vietnam. At this time, it's French Indochina. And the Japanese start to spread into mainland Asia, which we'll look at here in a second. So here are Japanese holdings, okay, from 1895 all the way to 1933, which is basically when um, you could argue World War II started with the invasion of the Japanese or the Chinese mainland. So in 1895, they took this part, okay, or early on, they took here, they move into the Korean Peninsula later in 1910. Taiwan, which used to be called Formosa, is also a Japanese possession. This is controlled, the Philippines are now controlled by the United States. But there's a war that's fought with Russia, the Russia-Sino War, excuse me, which is between Russia and China, and ends up being brokered in part by Japan, and they get a piece of the land because of that. But you can see the Japanese influence. They invade Manchuria later on through Korea and take over, and they then go to possess China and have multiple other holdings in Asia as well. All right, finally, there he is, Teddy, tromping through the Caribbean with his big stick, and really taken over, and this political cartoon shows the influence of the United States and really the wherewithal and the I guess ambition of the United States. So these countries would owe the U.S. a lot of money, especially those in Latin America, and they would be economically tied to us. We agreed to protect them, but again, nothing in this world is free, and in return for that, we get resources and influence and all that stuff. So, all right, guys, we'll end up there. Thanks.